Okay. Hi, Anika. How are you?
Hi, pretty good. How are you, Douglas?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on
Good.
the show. Nice to
Thanks
have
for
you here.
having me.
So, we're going to be talking about your book today, The Ghost in Her, which I see a great big cover behind you.
Yes.
And
It's all about promotion.
it is all about promotion.
Yeah.
How many books do you have published at this point?
Oh gosh. I would, let's see, just one, two, three, four books published, two nonfiction, two historical romances.
Okay. And as you mentioned before we got on, you did some crime novels or something?
Yeah, I also happen to be a lawyer. I practiced law for 20 years, so I have a big interest in true crime. So my first nonfiction book was about a serial killer I got to know in Connecticut who ultimately confessed all of his crimes to me. I wrote that book under my actual name, Ann K. Howard. And I also recently wrote another nonfiction entitled Escape from Mariupol under the name Ann Howard. And it's about a Ukrainian woman who I know who was trapped underground in Mariupol at the start of Russia's invasion for 5 weeks with the nonstop bombing. So my paranormal historical romance, which I write under Anika Savoy, is just very different from my nonfiction writing. It couldn't be more different. And it's definitely a lot more fun to write, and it's much more of an escape for me.
Okay. I'm sorry. I mispronounced your
Mm.
name. I said Anika. You go
I
Anika?
Anika. It's kind of like my name, Ann K. Anika.
Okay, very good. So this book, the Ghost in Her, what genre would this fall under?
Paranormal historical romance. So it takes place in 1888 in the Gilded Age in New York City, although it's part of what I call the Ungilded series, because I'm trying to write about characters during the Gilded Age, well, that represent the majority of people in the Gilded Age, working class immigrants, people living in poverty or just barely, able to make ends meet. And so it's got all of that history of the Bowery of New York City in 1888, but it also is cloaked with paranormal elements. My main character sees ghosts. She's a psychic. And so there are ghosts and fairies and witches in this book that are roaming the streets of the Bowery alongside my heroine.
The late 1800s in New York City would have been wonderful if you were rich and brutal if you were poor, right?
True, but I was writing a blog post today about corsets of that time, the corsets women would wear, and I don't think that was very fun to be a upper class woman at that time period. Just the way you had to dress and the way you couldn't have any opinions or have a career or get an education. So, relatively speaking, yes, the upper middle class women, the wealthy women, had it definitely easier than the poor women, but they still had a lot of their own, unhappy things to deal with, like wearing corsets.
Well, I would agree with you. And, social morality was so strict in those days
Yes.
that, women couldn't even go out without an escort or a chaperone or something like that.
Exactly. And that's a big part of my book is the main character is a 19-year-old Irish immigrant. And she literally lives in a hole. She lives underground in beneath a tenement building where the water's dripping from the street and the smell of garbage comes in. And, she's so vulnerable in that situation as an attractive young woman without a husband, without a father, without a family name. You really were like prey to a lot of the dangerous elements of New York City.
That's true. Now, why did you take
Mm.
such a serious topic and throw ghosts in? What was the point for that? Because this could have been a very much of a historical, almost political, social statement.
Yeah, yeah. Would you like to read that, Douglas? Would you like to read like an academic study of that time period, or would you like to just jump off into the water and have fun with a paranormal story set in that time period. So I just think I want to write the paranormal aspects in this story because that's what readers want to read. It's a lot of fun. And from a writer's perspective, it opens up my creativity. So I can transcend, logical reality and go into this portal, if you will, of all sorts of far out possibilities. And that's what writing in the paranormal genre really helps me to do. And I think every reader just kind of wants to go on that fast roller coaster ride and just have a really fun, entertaining, enjoyable experience when they're reading a story like this.
Well, I think that's a good point because
Yeah.
if it was just a straight, dry historical, it might be a little
Right.
boring. Yeah.
Yeah, you think about like Stephen King, The Green Mile, right? And I'm sure you're familiar with the movie, but if it were just about the prison system at that time and the, unjust incarceration of this man, it would be a very different read than what it was, which had a lot of supernatural and paranormal elements. If you remember in that story that this Black prisoner was actually a healer and something of a saintly character. So I think when you add that other layer of spirituality and paranormal, it just invites the reader in and it gives the book a lot of substance, a lot of true, I don't even know how to say, just it grapples with things beyond the here and now.
Well, that's a good point. What was that
Mhm.
black stuff that would come out of his mouth every time he healed somebody?
Oh,
Was that
remember that? It
was that
was like all
flies?
the evil, yeah, and they were like flies or maggots or I don't
Yeah.
know what they were, but that was horrific. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Well, you just reminded me of that movie. Good movie, by the way. Yeah.
A wonderful movie. Every time I see it, I cry at the end. But yeah, I think when he healed the woman, didn't he take all of the cancerous dark energy into his body as well? So, like the cancer was also a dark energy, just like human evil was a dark energy.
Yeah, that's true. I see on your book cover that this says book one, so I assume you're going to make this into a series.
Yeah, I have three books in mind, but if the series does well, heck, I could write it until I'm 85 years old in the nursing home. We'll see how it goes. But the next book is titled Mayhem in Disguise, and it is another paranormal story that takes place in 1889, and it tells the story of Bella's friend, who is a Mohegan Irish nurse. Excuse me, Maggie's friend at the end of The Ghost in Her. Her name is Bella, and she's a Mohegan Irish nurse, and she will be the heroine of Mayhem in Disguise. And that book's going to deal with energy vampires.
Oh, okay. So it's going to start with what is the first character? You said Maggie is her name?
Well, Maggie is the heroine of The Ghost in Her. Her name is Maggie O'Connor. And the heroine of the next book, Mayhem in Disguise, is Bella McGuire. And she's part Mohegan, part Irish. But given the time period, she puts a lot of powder on her face. She tries to speak very eloquently, like a proper English lady, to try to guise her Mohican heritage because it holds her back in life. But it's also part of her journey is going to be embracing her Mohican heritage and wearing it with pride.
You said that you are a lawyer, is that correct?
Yes, I retired a few years ago to devote all my time to writing full time, which has always been my dream. So yeah, I practiced for 20 years and I loved it. I actually loved the practice of law. I built up a few really big prosperous law practices, but I just when I hit my 50s, I thought it's time to pursue my true passion, which is writing.
So while you were practicing law, you had the dream to be a writer.
Well, I've always written. When I was practicing law, I was always working on fiction, historical romance manuscripts on the side, on the weekends, at night. And they more or less collected dust on my shelf. I just never had the time to get them to agents and pursue the publishing process because it really is like a full-time job when you're trying to get published and querying and whatnot. So I just let those collect dust, and it wasn't until the nonfiction His Garden came out that I decided it was time to really focus on writing fiction.
Was that one well received? Did you get some accolades for that?
Well, you can read the reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, and you be the judge. Like on Goodreads, on Amazon, I think it has 4.3 out of 5-star reviews, and it won a lot of awards. It won the Independent Press Award for Best Nonfiction. It won the New York City Big Book Award and some other readers' favorite type awards. So I think most people say in the reviews it's very well written, but when you're writing about such a controversial subject as a serial killer, because in that case I got to know the victims' families, I interviewed them, and you're going to get some backlash. And so you will see in some of the reviews people just a 1-star review, just appalled by it, or one person said Anne Howard's politics are all over this book, and damned if I know. I stayed away from any political kind of things, but they follow you on social media and they see how you think politically, and then they kind of give a review based on that. Stephen King faces that as well,
Oh,
right?
sure he does. Yeah. Let's see. We got just a couple of minutes. Why Anika never gets writer's block? That's what it says in your bio.
Well, I love to write. I think when you love to do something, as long as your body and mind are able to do it, you want to do it. It's as I said before, it's a passion for me. But also, I do a ton of research, whether I'm writing nonfiction or fiction. I start by being interested and curious about a subject. So whether it's a serial killer or a Ukrainian refugee, or in the case of my fiction, an impoverished Irish immigrant in the late 1800s. What I do is I do a ton of research beforehand, and I find stories within that research that kind of prompt me to think about different plot twists, new characters, different ways of creating the story in a fast-paced way.
Well, I think on that, we're going to have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Sure, you can go to anikasavoyauthor.com, and that will give you all the information you need about all of my books.
Okay, and The Ghost in Her, is that out now or is it coming out soon?
Yeah, The Ghost in Her is out, and the reviews on Goodreads have been really favorable. We recently came out with the audio book, and I would also encourage your listeners, they might be interested in the audiobook as well, because it's read by a woman. The narrator has a beautiful Irish lilt to her voice. So she really makes the character of Maggie come alive.
Okay, that's great. Well, Anika, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice
Okay,
meeting
it's
you.
my pleasure.
And best of luck with the books.
Okay, thank you, Douglas.